if you stole a television, you don't have ownership over a television.
Yes.
So when the police come and take it,
they're not stealing it.
They're not stealing it because you didn't have ownership over it. So let's say that theft, the starting point on theft is that you have to have ownership over an item in order for someone to be taking it by force and it being considered called theft.
Right. And I love that the left wing, this is logic of the left, is just the words they use and the worldview they have, where he goes, well, what it means is, because that wouldn't be theft if you were to steal something back that someone had just stolen from you. So that wouldn't be theft because the question is who's entitled to it. It's like, okay, the term you're looking for here is rightful owner. That's what you're looking for. Who owns it? Who's the rightful owner of it? It's like, yeah, rape wouldn't be rape if you own that chick's vagina, but you don't. It's hers, so it's rape. If a woman puts a dildo in her pussy, she's not raping herself because it's hers. Okay, like the obvious answer, the obvious thing that this all like hinges on is who's the rightful owner. So who is the rightful owner of the TV? If you're the rightful owner of the TV and someone else takes it from you, no, it's not theft to take it back because it's yours. It belongs to you. Okay, Professor of Logic, are you following my logic here? All right, let's keep playing.
In the early phases of Nazi rule in Germany, when there was lots of property that was taken away from German Jews and given to Gentiles, nobody, at least nobody outside of the alt-right, would describe a Jewish person who resisted this process or took back the property as stealing it, right? Because theft means taking it from somebody who is entitled to it, morally entitled to it. So
all right, let's pause it again. No, it's not that they're morally entitled to it. I mean, I guess, but like, it's that it was theirs. It's that they were the rightful owners of it. By the way, Professor of Logic here, the example he goes to is a state seizing property from the rightful owners. That's the example that he goes to be like, well, none of us would have a problem if the Jews violently fought back to protect their stuff. Well, Professor of Logic, what's the logical conclusion of that? So basically what you're saying by your own example is that if someone wants to fight back against a tax collector, that would not be theft. That would not be immoral. It's wild that this Professor of Logic does not see the contradiction in him bringing up an example of an authoritarian state taking things away from the rightful owner. And you can say they're morally entitled to it. I mean, I don't know. I guess. Yes, if they're the rightful owner of it, then it's their stuff.
Well, here's what he's trying to do. He's creating this parameter by which you're allowed to take an item by force, and that's if you're morally entitled to it. So
and then he can just switch around who's morally entitled to it.
So let's agree with him. Let's go, great. If you're morally entitled to something, you can take it by force. Now, let's define what morally entitled is.
Right.
So you and I are going to define it as ownership, if it belongs to you. He's going to try and come in and say if the state's taking it from you, the state has a moral entitlement to your wealth into redistributing it.
Right.
So
but which is so funny that his example was the state taking things away from a group of people.
Theft, yes. So he himself acknowledges that's theft. So now we have to have that conversation of, okay, so is the state morally entitled to take something? So you and I will go, well, just taking something sounds like theft. What's your definition of their entitlement to your property?
Right. Well, let's continue playing the video because he does elaborate a little bit more.
Work here. By the way, just quick shout out, Matt Brunig of the People's Policy Project has written a lot of really good stuff about this. He presents the argument a slightly different way than I am, but it's very much worth checking out. That what's really doing all the work when people make this taxatious theft argument, that if it's not just a completely vacuous argument, taxation is wrong because it's theft, and it's theft because it's wrong, right? It's theft because people don't really, the people taking it, right? If money has been taken from wealthy business owners to pay for school lunches in the inner city, well, it's only theft if the wealthy business owners have a morally better claim on it than poor kids in the inner city.
Let's pause it there. So here's where we go off the rails.
The morally better claim is it's theirs.
Yes.
They can spend it on whatever the fuck they want because it's theirs.
Well, again, here's the funny thing, right?
They can go fund kids if they want to.
Here's there's so much about this that's so great. The morally better claim on it. Okay. This is why it's so slippery to go who is morally entitled to it or the morally better claim than to say who's the rightful owner, which, by the way, obviously in any level is how you define theft. Like, if someone comes and fucking snaps your wristwatch off your fucking hand and runs away with it, the cops don't sit there and wonder who has more of a moral claim on this. I mean, how many wristwatches do you have at home? Does this guy have any wristwatches? And I think we could all see what a perversion of justice it would be if that was the avenue that we went down. The only question that should be involved in theft was who was the rightful owner of it. Doesn't matter if you have 10 wristwatches and he has 0. He doesn't have a right to just come take them from you. The hilarious part about this is that now he's pivoted to actually justifying taking the Jews' shit during Nazi Germany. Do you think the Jews were struggling? Is this your understanding of history? That in the Weimar Republic, before the Nazis rose, that the Jews were a really poor group of people and that the Nazis started taking their shit and giving it to other Germans? Do you think they were struggling? No, they were doing incredibly well. The Jews were doing incredibly well. This was part of the reason why they were resented. Before you people in the chat jump on me, it's not the only reason. I know there was other things. Jews are subversive or whatever. I'm saying that this is not you're actually justifying it right there. The reason why most people look at seizing Jewish businesses or seizing Jewish assets as wrong is because they were the rightful owners of those businesses, of that money. Okay? It's not because they had a better moral claim on it than some fucking German kid who was starving. They were going through hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic. There were people starving, or people who were orphans, had lost both their parents in the First World War. Who's to say the Jews were more morally entitled to it by your line of thinking? In fact, your line of thinking would open up the possibility that maybe it was the right thing to seize the money from the Jews. I mean, okay, you could say it should have been all rich people and not just this one group of people who were doing well, the Jews, but that's more or less what you're saying. So all of this has nothing to do with theft. Who do we feel like needs it more?
It's also, if you take the morally entitled to wealth, let's say you take his approach and you say, okay, you're a rich guy over here and the inner city kids don't have lunch. So the rich guy is not morally entitled to his wealth. Someone needs to come in and make sure that those kids have lunch. If you take that line of reasoning, then I would think that every single dollar every one of us earns better go right to Africa to solve, because
damn right.
They don't have that money.
Because that inner city kid is rich compared to some sub-Saharan African.
It doesn't even it doesn't matter that I earned it. I'm not morally entitled to even work and gain money while those people don't have anything.
That is absolutely the moral, logical conclusion of what this guy is arguing. That really, I don't know, maybe you could keep like $10-15 a day, but you got to share the rest of that shit with all the billions of poor people in the world. There's billions of people who by American standards would be, in poverty. So yeah, we got to start sharing with all of them. You don't own any of that shit. So it's an unworkable system of justice. And the truth is that somebody owns everything. And I don't mean owns everything together. I mean every individual thing. Somebody is going to own it. If you understand what ownership is, or acting as an owner of something, it's really the person who makes the decisions about whatever that piece of property is. If you're the owner of it, you can do with it what you want. Assuming it's voluntary, and you can own a club. You can't bash someone else over the head with it because they own their head, so you can't violate their property rights. But if you own something, you are the one who's making the controlling decisions over it. So in this case, what you are arguing, and this is where the criticisms of libertarian property rights always falls apart, and they don't want to acknowledge this, but you're also arguing for property ownership. You're just arguing that the state owns it. Now, you may say the state's going to do something better with it. They're going to give it to these other people to own. So I'm going to take this money and then I'm going to give it to poor kids in an inner city so they own the money now. But your argument is all that the state should be acting as the owner, that they should be able to take the money. And the same point you were making, it's not really theft then, right? Because they're morally entitled to it. All right. So the question then becomes and this is where property rights, the essence of it, comes from. Who has the most legitimate right to claim ownership on something? Because either everybody owns something, these ideas like the people own it, in which case it means nothing and nobody can have anything and we would never produce anything and we'd have conflict all over the place because everyone's competing to use the same thing that no one claims ownership to. Or the state owns it because the state is such a noble, benevolent institution that never does anything wrong. So the state owns it and then on behalf of the people can do what it sees fit, okay? Or individuals own things. Now, how would you determine who is the rightful owner of a said possession? Okay, well, it's not actually that complicated. If Rob goes into the woods, let's say there's just a state of nature, like big wooded area, and you chop down a tree and you build a chair out of it, who rightfully owns that chair? Is it reasonable to say it's Rob's because he mixed his labor with unowned natural resources and made a chair? Guys, it's just an analogy. Rob's a Jew. He's not capable of building a chair.
I always said first to pee on it.
Yes. Yeah. No, like that's...
Go by the dog rule. First to pee on it.
Actually a better standard than just saying the state owns it.
You know how many women R. Kelly owns right now?
But so you go into the state of nature, you build a chair, you take your time, your energy, your knowledge, and you mix it with labor, and you build something, okay? And you have that chair. Now, who has a better claim to that chair? You or a couple hundred people in Washington, D.C. who have decided they rule over the entire country? It's that simple. If they come to take it from you, I mean, who has more of a moral claim on the ownership of that? I would say, and sane people everywhere would say, well, Rob did, because he's the one who worked on this, okay? Again, sometimes when it comes to taxation, the money can almost be a distraction. Because really, what is money? It's a medium of exchange. You know what I mean? It's just something that helps us, theoretically, over time, it used to be a store of value. That's all gone. But it's a medium of exchange where you can now exchange that chair to a farmer and say, hey, I built this chair. I know you need a chair. Let me get some chicken or whatever. So forget the medium of exchange. Forget the money. Just think of it as the stuff. If you want to get down to who really owns it. Rob spends all his day chopping down trees. He's sweaty. He's hot. He's chopping down trees, exerting all of this energy. He didn't have fun with his day. He didn't fuck his girlfriend with his day. He didn't lay back in the sun and read a book. He worked hard so that he could have these chairs that he could then exchange for food and shelter and all these other things, and one chair for himself to sit in or whatever. So Rob, at the end of a day of working real hard, sacrificing all of the pleasure that he could have had with that day and exerting himself, he's got 12 chairs. Who owns those chairs? If someone comes in and puts a gun to you and says, give me 5 of them, I'd say that guy stole them from Rob. This is the argument. There's no logical fallacy in saying taxation is theft and theft is wrong and wrong is theft. The point is that it is theft. I hope this guy would also accept that theft is wrong. He seemed to accept it when it was the Jews. I guess if it's like a protected minority, then it would be, in fact, wrong and theft. So can he at least agree with me that we should stop taxing minorities? Is he on board with that? We should stop stealing their stuff. How about that? Why don't we look at the history of the Nazis and the history of the United States government and say who's taken more from Jews? I mean, really, if you think about it in total, we've been around a lot longer.